Hey guys, it's Nina. I'm a 4/6 emotional manifestor, and in today's video, I'm going to talk about the open spleen. So, for those of you who have a defined spleen, this may be helpful to understand those around you who have this center open. And it can be experienced a lot of different ways. And today I'm going to share my experience with the open spleen. And I will share my chart so you can see I have two gates in the spleen. I have, what do I have? The 44 and the 50. And normally when you have an open center, the themes of those hanging gates and that open center are what you tend to experience when the transits have the spleen defined, or you're around somebody with a defined spleen, because they trigger, this type of response or reaction within those gates that are in your open spleen. So I'll talk a little bit more in detail about how I experience the gate 44 and gate 50 as well. So to start off, open spleen, so many things that to talk about. So the first thing is that I do have a lot of fears, and as a 6 line in the first third of my life, I did everything to try to work past those fears, and that meant traveling alone, bungee jumping, skydiving. I was a gymnast for 10 years, 8 or 10 years, and doing backflips on the beam, like the 4-inch balance beam, and doing handstands on the bars and all of those things. Like, I was terrified. I don't want to say I hated it, I loved it, but it was also terrifying at the same time. And with my open heart, I was constantly trying to prove that I could work past those fears. And once I hit my Saturn return and I moved past the age of 30, I started to realize I don't need to prove any of that. I don't need to work past fears. If there's a fear, there's a valid reason that I have that fear, and I can trust that. And so that is actually something really big that I have become much more aware of with my open spleen, especially in this past year. So in my 20s, I would travel solo a lot. I would backpack in Europe and Thailand and just like Costa Rica and all these different places. And, I always had fears with it. But after my Saturn return, I really, and started to climb on the roof as a 6 line, I really started to have less of a desire to do those types of things. And so when I decided to take a 4-month trip to Mexico, it was like I had a front row seat to what was going on with my open spleen. And I started to really understand it on a much deeper level. So when I went, I was like, I don't really need to do this, but I'm going to do it because I wanted to settle down, but I wanted to give myself this solo travel experience before I really started to ground down and, buy a house and start having a family and all of that stuff. So, I'm really, really glad I had the experience. My 35, 36, loved every single minute of it. And it was really beautiful and really transformative for me. But, with the open spleen and traveling alone, specifically just this past year, I started to become aware of how my body felt in certain situations when fears would arise, and then also the thoughts that would come in. So there's a difference between, how the body feels and tapping into that and saying, oh, this is an actual fear, and I really don't need to move forward with this. I don't need to force anything. And then with my open heart, trying to prove something, saying, oh, I can do this, or I'm going to do this because I don't want people to see that I'm, afraid of something, if you have say an open head or open ajna. And then there are the thoughts that are like, oh, this doesn't seem logical or whatever. But that's when you learn how to differentiate between the open spleen, between what's healthy and what's not healthy for you, because the open spleen will tell you if you're paying attention. And for me, it's very much in the body. So for example, there were excursions that I would go on, and I would say oh, well, I don't really want to go on this because it seems scary. Like an excursion I went on, swam with whale sharks, and my mind was like, oh, this is scary. I don't want to swim next to this big shark and do this. But my body was like, you'd probably be fine. It's not going to eat you or anything. Like, it eats plankton. It's like an ocean vacuum. Like, it's really not that scary. It was just the mind was saying like, oh, this is scary. But in my body, I felt calm. And so I ended up going, and it was this like amazing experience. And, but on the flip side of that, when I had on another excursion that I went on, it was something where it was an all-day trip, and it didn't really feel right for me to go. And I ended up canceling it because my mind was trying to justify why I should go, but my body was having like a very big heck no reaction. And that was the first time that I really became aware of, oh, this is where my spleen is telling me that this is not healthy, and I don't really understand why. And so that's something I've been a little bit more tapped into about, you know, what my body versus what my mind is saying, and where those fears are really coming from, and what's logical, and then what's kind of like this primal instinct of like, oh, this doesn't feel right. So that was one thing that I really experienced, especially traveling alone as a woman in Mexico for 4 months. I honestly felt safe most of the time, like pretty much the entire time. I never really put myself in different scenarios, but I was on hyper alert, and I really learned how to tune into my body, because there were situations where I didn't feel comfortable, and I ended up not moving forward in those situations because I trusted that. But it was such an epiphany for me when I began to realize that, oh, these are just thoughts. Oh, I can swim in the ocean. There's nothing to be afraid of while I'm swimming in the ocean, and I can actually enjoy it, instead of having these mental fears of like, oh, like seaweed or fish might touch me or something silly like that. So sometimes there's not really like a real fear to be concerned about. And so I'm curious if anyone else has experienced that with the open spleen, as far as like danger or moving forward with things that may seem scary, but your body is calm and your mind is resisting it, or vice versa. Another thing with the open spleen is that I'm hyper sensitive to my health, and then also to the health of the people around me. Like, for example, when I'm around somebody and they I just get this feeling that they're not healthy. So if they don't take care of their body, or, say they don't eat very well, or they're really overweight, or like something like that, I can immediately pick up. It's almost like there's like this staticky feeling. And sometimes I even get like a download of like what their health issue is. And this is me like being really tapped into my human design experiment for the past 3 years or so. And just having a feeling cognition as well, I think plays into it, and being quad right. So other variables, but I'm just a little bit more tapped into that. But with the open spleen, I feel like this is actually pretty common, and people just aren't aware that it's an actual thing that they can tap into. So, when I'm around somebody, I can tell whether that person is healthy or not. And it actually is, having an open G, it's also something that's very helpful for me to know whether someone is healthy to hang around, or to be around. And also from like me being super sensitive and in tune to my own health, like anytime that there's something like slightly off, I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to take this medicine or do this. And it's like, I'm hypersensitive to any shifts or changes in my physical body. And so that really can actually be really unhealthy, because you become almost like this hypochondriac, and you're like, oh, something's not right. And then you're constantly trying to fix it, instead of allowing the body that's very resilient and strong to be able to work through whatever it's going through. And that's actually a lesson that I've had to learn over time, to not seek things externally to try to like fix me or make me feel healthier, because that's very common for someone with an open spleen to be hypersensitive, to say, ooh, I feel like I'm getting sick, versus someone with a defined spleen, they may not be aware of those warning signs before they get sick, and then bam, one day they wake up and they're super sick. So that is the benefit of having an open spleen, is just you're hypersensitive to your immune system and what's going on within the body, and you can kind of get ahead of things and take vitamin C, or rest, or do something that your body actually needs because it's telling you, and you can tap into that a little bit more easier than say like defined spleens. So it's kind of like a superpower, in my opinion, to have an open spleen, but it can be a little bit of a curse if you're not aware of how to use it and get caught up in the mind stuff and try to seek for things externally to try to fix yourself. So from that health perspective, you know, it can be something that goes in a not so great direction, or it could be used to your benefit. But it still does kind of get to me sometimes where I'm like, ooh, this is wrong with me. And then it's like kind of like going on WebMD where you're like, oh my gosh, I have this symptom and now I'm like going to die. And so I feel like that's something that's a dialogue that can go in someone's mind that has an open spleen, where it's just like, you think the absolute worst thing is wrong with you in the moment, when it's really just something that's happening in your body. Or say you're around a defined spleen that isn't healthy and you're picking up on their stuff, because that is possible. Or transits might be coming through and you might get sick, or you know, something just might be shifting within your immune system, and you're just more tapped in and tuned to that. So I do want to touch on a little bit more on the actual gates that I have, because the spleen center is all about fears, and it's very primal, very in the moment. And the gates that I have are 44 and gate 50. So gate 44 is all about fear of the past. And this is something that becomes very apparent for me, especially when I'm around other people or in relationships. It's like when I become more intimate or deeper in relationships with people, there's always this fear of like getting hurt, or, you know, the fear of repeating something that I've done in the past, or that, you know, a fear of behaving in a certain way like my parents did in their marriage that may not have been healthy, and I don't want to repeat that. Or, you know, a fear of getting hurt in the past, and so I'm not going to go ski because I hurt myself in the past doing that. And so it's becoming aware of like, okay, these are very valid fears, but how can I sit with it and say, okay, like, this is here to teach me something, and I can do things differently moving forward instead of sitting in a state of fear. And so it's been really helpful for me to become more aware of my thoughts versus what is like an actual fear, like I was speaking about earlier. That's actually like a fear that's threatening to you, or that's valid. And with gate 50, this is about fear of responsibility. And this is, you know, it's a very nurturing, caring, like tribal gate. And so the way that I experience this is that I do tend to shy away from taking on big responsibilities and things like that, because I can, especially with my open heart, take on too much or care for people to my detriment, where I get sick or I'm not taking care of myself. And so it's something just to be more aware of if you have this actual gate, because you know, you might shy away from things, or you might give too much of yourself. So you can kind of experience both, you know, aspects of that. And one other thing with open spleen is smell, like hypersensitive to smells. And this, I think this also has something to do, I'm looking at my chart right now, something to do with one of my gates in my solar plexus, but I'm like hypersensitive to smells. And so if I walk into a place and I don't like the smell of it, I immediately walk out. That's something that I have learned to trust, even if it makes absolutely no sense, because there's something that is not healthy for me in that place. If it's a restaurant, then I shouldn't be eating there. If it's like a store that I walk into and the smell is overpowering or something doesn't smell right, I'm just like, I just walk out and I just go somewhere else, because there's something intuitive, there's something primal that's telling me like, this smell is not okay and is not in resonance with what feels or seems healthy for me. So I'm curious if anyone else has experienced that with smells and their spleen, because it is a very primal thing. So, and the last thing that I want to touch on is just like, you know, open spleens, we like to hold on to very unhealthy things, and that can be relationships, it can be careers or jobs, it can be people, or, you know, just holding on to things that aren't healthy for you. And I'm like the poster child for this. Unfortunately, you know, I've been in relationships that were very toxic, that were very trauma bound, and like very not self, and I held on to it because the person has a defined spleen. And so I felt very safe, even though mentally and emotionally it was like a very destructive relationship. Like I could not leave. And as much as I wanted to, so there was like this inner conflict. And, obviously if there's like abuse or something, just absolutely you should leave and take care of yourself or your children or whoever's in that situation. But, there are other aspects of like mental and emotional and physical abuse in a relationship. And I find that for me personally and other open spleens that I know of, we tend to hold on to things, and it can be very damaging in like short-term and long-term if we are not able to let go of people or relationships or even friendships that are just not healthy. And that is actually a conversation that you need to have for yourself, and about whether something is healthy or correct for you. And this is where a lot of the deconditioning comes in for the open spleen. And this is something that I've really had to work on for the last few years, just for myself personally in relationships, is knowing when to set boundaries, even though there is some sort of attachment, because there can be trauma bonds that are formed of going back and forth with somebody, and you may not be aware of because there's so much entanglement. And so that's where I find having support, like really great support systems or community or friends to bounce ideas off of, or to just to tell them what's going on, so that you can have a third party perspective, or having a therapist, or going to a counselor and having them provide you a different perspective when you're really, really open and honest about what's going on in that relationship or friendship, because it really may not be healthy for you. And with an open spleen, sometimes we are the last people to see that, even though everyone else around us sees it. And, I've experienced this as well, especially as a fourth line, because, Ra talks about, as a fourth line, don't leave a relationship unless you have somebody else lined up. I've never been like that. I've never felt the need to be like that, but I am a split definition as well, and with an open spleen. And so having other people around, I'm going to feel more safer and more complete. And so just paying attention to the fears that come along with that, and saying, oh, am I staying in this relationship or this friendship because they make me feel more secure? Or like, how do I actually feel when I'm around that person? How do I feel when I leave that person, or I'm not in their aura? Or how do I feel when I'm alone? And you begin to distinguish like what actually feels healthy and what feels best for you. And sometimes the mind is very, very strong, and it does not like to admit defeat or to let go of things because it has such a tight grip on it. So this, like I said, this can actually be a really destructive trait of the open spleen if you're not aware. But the good news is you can go through your deconditioning process by becoming more aware and just being radically honest with yourself. And so that's from a relationship perspective. I've experienced this with my career as well, and the fears of not having an income, and the fears of not having security, especially like, again, coming in with my fourth line, and my open spleen, of needing to hold on to something for that security because there are fears associated with it. And I have stayed in jobs to the point where it has like totally affected my mental and physical health, because there was so much comfort in that job, and it was easy, but I wasn't in alignment with the goals, and I wasn't in alignment with the values or the mission of the company. And it was like I was literally putting things out like for my job that were in complete like dissonance with my being and my value system. And it like tore my soul up, but I liked the comfort of the money and having that secure job. And it makes sense. But it eventually came to the point where I was let go from that job, and because I couldn't let go of it. And it worked out perfectly in the end. It was, part of my deconditioning journey, and I'm so glad I'm not working there anymore. But, it was causing issues with my health. And especially, my unconscious moon is 50.2, and that's all about values. And, again, it was causing conflict because the 50th gate is in the spleen, and it's all about values. And so being in direct conflict with my values was having an effect on my actual health. So something to be aware of, where you might be clinging on to people or jobs or things that really aren't healthy for you mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, and just seeing how they affect you. So the first step is really just an awareness and observing yourself. And that's been my process with the open spleen. And it has been difficult and heart-wrenching and, just a challenge. But the more that you begin to decondition, it's like you peel back those layers and those attachments and you see what's underneath, and it's like there's no going back, because like the more that you become aligned with yourself and the more you become aware of yourself, you realize there's this like total freedom in this life of being aligned with your design. And that is like the most beautiful aspect of human design, is that it gives you this blueprint to come back to yourself, to remember who you are as you begin to peel back these layers of deep conditioning. So I think that's all I have to say about the open spleen for now. For anyone who is defined, this is just kind of a glimpse as to how open spleens might, experience themselves. And so you might run into someone who's super fearful and you're like, why are they like that? And maybe it's because they have an open spleen. Or maybe you're in a relationship and someone is like super clingy with you, or, other people tend to gravitate towards you in situations where there might be fearful things involved. And you're like, why? Why did they feel safe around me? Probably because you have a defined spleen. And just from my own personal experience, defined spleens are like this soft, warm, cuddly place to be. And I just feel safe. And I just feel like, especially when the spleen is really healthy, it's something that I feel very attracted to, is to be around a defined spleen. So that is a little bit of a superpower that you can have over people who are not aware and have an open spleen. So, all right, this video is about 22 minutes, so I'm going to cut it off for now. This is all I have to say about the open spleen. I'm curious what everyone else's experience is, so please leave a comment below, and I'd love to hear from you guys. All right, bye.